Hey everyone, and welcome to Floor One. We are so excited that you are joining us today. We know that church is going to look a little bit different over these next couple weeks. Even though we are hanging out screen to screen, it doesn't mean that we can't be the church. And so we just want you to know that we're going to be here every single Sunday at 11 o'clock through YouTube. And then on Wednesday nights at 6 o'clock, we're going to be on Instagram Live doing Common Meal. And then every night, Monday through Saturday at 8 o'clock, we're going to be dropping in on Instagram again, just bringing you something positive and encouraging and sometimes even something funny. Right now, we're trying everything we can do to be the church and to connect with each other. And here's what we believe. We believe that this season right now of life for all of us is a chance for us to be the church in a way that we've never gotten to be the church before. This is the time for us to come together, to reach out, to make connections, to be the hands and feet of Jesus. And we're excited to see what's going to happen. Here in a moment, we're going to kick off the service. But first, we've got a little treat for you today. We've got some worship for you. And it's our hope and prayer that even though we're screen to screen, you can experience God in a deeper way this morning. And you can experience ultimately life change through Jesus Christ. We miss you guys and we love you guys, and we're excited to see what God's going to do in our lives.
Can't go back to the beginning. Can't control what tomorrow will bring, but I know here in the middle is a place where you promised to be. I'm not enough unless you come. Will you meet me here again? 'Cause all I want is all you are. Will you meet me here again? As I walk now through the valley, let your love rise above every fear, like the sun shaping the shadow. In my weakness, your glory appears. I'm not enough unless you come. Will you meet me here again? 'Cause all I want is all you are. Will you meet me here again? I'm not enough I want is all you are. Will you meet me here again?
Well, hey everybody, and welcome back to Floor One. We hope that you enjoyed that worship, and we're excited to jump into this message. Even though life is a little weird right now, we're still going to stick to our series, and so we are in week 3 of the dating series. And as we have said before, having a dating relationship is different than anything else you're ever going to have in your life. And here's the thing: when we're in relationships, we tend to throw common sense completely out the window. When I was in high school and Elise and I were dating, we were getting ready to celebrate our 1-year anniversary. And so I spent weeks on this big photo collage that had all these pictures of the past year and all these like special knickknacks. And so it was Sunday morning, and I was so excited to see her and so excited to give her this gift that I had been working so hard on. And in my excitement, I locked my keys and the picture in the car. Now, the reasonable thing in that moment would be to just wait for my parents to bring the extra set of keys. But not me, man. I was in love with this girl, and nothing was going to stop me from giving her this gift from my heart. So I did the most logical, common sense thing. I busted out the window so I could get the picture. Now, that was a stupid decision. As a matter of fact, it was about a $150 decision that I had to pay out of my high school budget, which at the time wasn't very much. But you know what? I didn't care because I love this girl and I wanted her to have this gift. That's what relationships do to us. They make us throw common sense out the window, or unfortunately in my case, it literally threw common sense through the window. And that's the thing. You know, when you think about relationships, like when it comes to friendships, I think there's this general understanding of how friendships should go. So if you have a friend and you're in a friend group, you just kind of know how things should be. But something crazy happens to us when we enter into a relationship. It's like we just lose control. We become different people. And you've probably seen this happen to someone that's your friend, or even someone that might not be your friend that you share life with. Have you ever watched somebody who in every single area of their life is incredibly smart, but then once they start dating, it's like they just become really dumb overnight? Well, that's what relationships do to us. Maybe you've heard some of these statements before. Maybe you have a friend that says, "I've never dated anyone like this." But you've been watching them for a long time, and you know that person that they're dating is exactly like the 4 other people that they dated before that. This person isn't any different, and this relationship is going to end the same way those 4 relationships ended, and that's badly. Or maybe you've had a friend who starts hanging out with somebody, and they're just like, "Listen, nothing is going on between us except for the fact that they spend every single living moment of their life with this person," until eventually they start checking out of your friend group, and sure enough, a couple months later, they're dating when they've already been dating. Or maybe you've heard this. Someone gets real serious in their relationship, like so serious it feels like they're married serious, and they'll say something like this: "Listen, I know most relationships in high school don't end in marriage, but this relationship, oh, this is different. I know we are going to end up together." You've probably heard a lot of those stories before, and to be honest, some of them are kind of funny, but then some of them are really sad, because you see the outcome of those relationships and the hurt that happens to them, and sometimes even the hurt that happens to their friendships. And it really is heartbreaking. And I think for a lot of us who are watching from the sidelines, we're asking some of the same questions, like, why would somebody do that? Don't they know how it's always going to end when situations come like that? And I think that's why when people talk about dating, they talk about dating with a lot of regret. Now, here's the thing. Dating isn't bad. I know when we started this series a couple weeks ago, you all thought when I came out here and started talking about dating that I would spend 4 weeks telling you not to date. It's actually the opposite. Dating can actually be really great in high school. And our goal during this series is to help you save the date and to help you date well. The problem is this: when we start dating somebody and we get into a relationship, sometimes it becomes really hard to see things clearly. Sometimes we will throw common sense out the window and we will make choices we otherwise wouldn't make, ultimately leaving us in a place of regret. Now, it's really easy to see this in other people. But it's not easy to see this when you are in the relationship. Maybe you have personally gone through some of these things. Like maybe you had a friend who started dating somebody who had a really bad reputation, and you and all your other friends were talking to them like, hey, you shouldn't date this person. This isn't going to end well. But then all of a sudden you date somebody that has a bad reputation. And you start to justify the reasoning, and you start to say to yourself, listen, my situation is completely different. I can completely and totally handle this. Or maybe you have a friend who started dating, and then that relationship started getting a little deeper than what it should, and there were some set boundaries with your friend and their significant other, and then those boundaries quickly became broken. And you thought, gee, man, who would ever do anything like that? But then you started dating somebody, and you thought you would take it slow, but then it got fast really quick. And it's amazing how we can become the thing that we said we weren't going to become when emotions and physical connection become a part of something. Or maybe here's a real heartbreaking one that you've seen. Your friend dates somebody who's known to mess around with other people. And everybody in your friend group is saying, listen, that person is a cheater. You need to get away from them. But then what happens when you date somebody who's a cheater? And people come up to you and say, you need to get out of this relationship. I think sometimes what we like to say is, yeah, that cheating moment, that was a one-time incident. Our relationship is completely different. You see, I think we have some general rules when it comes to dating. Here's some really good rules. Number one, don't date a cheater. That's really good advice. Number two, don't date somebody who is going to bring you down. Maybe also don't date somebody who is going to treat you poorly. And probably one of the most important rules, don't date someone who pulls you away from your friends, your goals, or the values you have for yourself. I think if we got into a room and we talked about dating and rules for dating, we could all agree those are some really great rules. The problem is this: when we start to fall for somebody and we start to get emotionally attached and our feelings starting to get away, those rules, they tend to bend a little bit. And they tend to get really flexible. And then what happens is we start saying things like this. Like, it's fine. I know this relationship isn't the way I thought it was going to be, but it's just the way that it is, and it's going to be completely okay. Or maybe we start to say to ourselves, you know what? I can control this. This won't get out of hand. And I think one of the big ones that we say that gets us in a lot of trouble is this: I can handle the consequences. I know this isn't the way it's supposed to be, but I can handle the consequences of where this is going to go. Ultimately, anytime we start saying this, and anytime we start bending the rules we have for ourselves when it comes to dating, these views bring us to a place with less than great decisions. So what do we do about that? How do we save dating from ourselves when we get in the way of really bad decisions? So today we're going to be hanging out in 2 Samuel, and we're going to be talking about King David. Now, we've talked a lot about King David from floor one, and almost every time we talk about David, it's positive. We know that David was a man after God's own heart. We know that David, who wrote almost all the Psalms and Scriptures, was someone that had a deep, passionate relationship with the God of the universe. I mean, goodness, man, we know David as the kid who killed a giant. You don't even have to be a church person to get that. But unfortunately today, we're going to be talking about one of David's darkest moments. And the story picks up in 2 Samuel chapter 11, verse 1. It says, in the spring of the year when kings normally go out to war, David sent Joab and the Israelite army to fight the Ammonites. So there was this thing that kind of culturally was pretty normal when during David's time, when kingdoms would fight each other, kings would actually go fight with their armies. And so to start the story off with David not going to fight and David staying home is very strange. It's really uncharacteristic of David, because what we know about David is he is a warrior king. He is a fighter. He is a giant killer. But in this particular situation, he does not go off to war. David decides to stay home. And so while David's army is fighting, David is bored. I think we can all relate to being bored, right? Like, we're only 1 week into this quarantine, and it could last longer. And so we all know that nothing good happens when you're bored. Maybe some of you guys have experienced that firsthand this week. And so David is bored. And so David being king, he's got the biggest house on the block, and David's kingdom and his palace set above all the others. And so David decides one night to walk on the top of his palace. And the way the palaces were built that way, like there weren't roofs like we typically think of roofs. They were very much flat. And so David, his building is above all the other buildings. And as he's looking down on everybody, honestly, being really creepy, he notices that there's this woman who's showering on top of her roof. And now, again, this wasn't a weird thing either, because they would actually collect the rainwater from the top of the roofs and they would actually shower on the top. And so he's looking down and he sees this woman, and she's absolutely beautiful. We find out that her name is Bathsheba. And when David sees her, lust overtakes him. And David, being the king, being in control of all things, made a decision. And so he chose to reach out and find out who this woman was. And we find out in 2 Samuel 11:3 that the servant he sent to find out who Bathsheba was comes back and says this: "She is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, and the wife of Uriah the Hittite." Isn't it interesting that the messenger doesn't just tell David her name? He could have just said, "That's Bathsheba." But this messenger knew exactly what David's intentions were, and he added a little extra. He wanted David to know, this woman that you're looking at, this woman that clearly you want, this is somebody's daughter. And more importantly, this is somebody's husband. David, she's not yours. You don't get to have her. But the problem with David was he was not interested in that moment in logic, and his judgment was completely clouded by his emotions. I think it's safe to say, like us in those moments, David made some assumptions. David's first assumption was probably the fact that he believed he was the exception to the rule. As king, he could do anything that he wanted. The second assumption was the fact that what David wanted, he probably didn't think was that bad. He justified his decisions, and ultimately he did what we do, and he believed that he could manage the consequences of that situation. So what happens is this: David invites Bathsheba over to the house, and then David and Bathsheba hook up, and then David finds out shortly after that Bathsheba is pregnant. Now here's the problem. Not just the fact that he did all that, but the other problem is that Bathsheba's husband, whose name is Uriah, is off fighting in the war that David should be fighting. So here's the first thing that David understands, and he learns a very important, hard lesson. I think it's one that we learn anytime we decide to bend the rules and we start to believe that it's different for us. David learned in that moment that he was not an exception. It didn't matter that he was king. It didn't matter what his name was, and all the things about him that were great. In that moment, David messed up. And David was not an exception. And now David is going to have to face some consequences of this decision. And he's got some explaining that he has to do. Now here's the thing. If in that moment, David would have just owned the mistake, this whole trouble could have been way worse than what it's about to be. And I think that's exactly where you and I are in these situations, especially in our dating relationships. There are doors that we open and there are lines that we cross, that in that moment when we open that door and we cross that line and we do those things that we said we weren't going to do, and we bend those rules that we said we weren't going to bend, if we could stop in that moment, seek forgiveness and seek repentance, we could stop the chain of destruction. But just like David, we start to think that we're in control. And we start to think that we can handle the consequences. And so David has this idea. He brings in Uriah from the battle. And for a couple of nights, David tries to get Uriah to sleep with his wife. Now, Uriah is an honorable soldier. And while his brothers are fighting in war, he won't fight. He won't share a bed with his wife. And so David actually goes to the point to where he gets Uriah drunk so that he can send him home to be with Bathsheba, and he won't do it. So then what's David going to do? Well, David, instead of just confessing to what he did and owning the situation and facing the consequences, David, for whatever reason, believes that the only option is to kill Uriah. So David writes a letter to Uriah's commander. He seals it with his seal, and he gives it to Uriah. And in that letter, it says this: put Uriah on the front line of the battle, put him in the middle of the heaviest part of the fight, and then bring the support back so that Uriah can be killed. And that's exactly what happens. David murders Uriah. And of course, news comes back that Uriah has been killed, and Bathsheba is a grieving widow. So what does David do as a righteous, just man? He marries Bathsheba. And then, of course, she's pregnant and nobody thinks anything of it. Wow, like it's crazy thinking about the chain of bad decisions. Someone from the outside looking in, it's easy to say, man, what was David thinking? Why in the world would he make so many terrible decisions? And here's the thing, when we're in the middle of a situation, we can completely lose perspective. We can convince ourselves that we are the exception. And nobody's the exception. Sin is sin, and consequences are consequences. And when we choose to walk across lines, and we choose to settle for less, and we choose to bend the rules that we set up for each other, we are going to get burned, and we are going to get hurt. Unfortunately, a lot of us who believe that we're the exception believe this. We believe that we won't have regrets, but we absolutely will. And we believe that we won't get caught. And I promise you that you will. And we believe that we can turn things around. And unfortunately, there are things that we set in motion that can't be turned around. We believe that we can make things right, and we believe that we won't turn out like everyone else. We believe that we have a relationship that others possibly couldn't understand. And even though all the other relationships in the world have to follow these healthy guidelines, we think that our relationship could be completely different. And here's the heartbreaking truth. When we believe that we're the exception to the usual consequences, we're just in denial. And here's the crazy thing about denial. The more you try to bury and hide in denial, the greater the problems are. The more you try to hide in denial and use it as a shield, the greater your problems are going to be. Like, it's easy when you read David's story to see what he did wrong. It's easy to be able to say, man, David, if you could have just stopped. And I think that's the question, right? Like, why did David keep making bad decisions? Why do you and I, in our relationships, unfortunately, sometimes keep making bad decisions? Maybe you're watching this from home right now, and you can identify with David, especially in your relationships. Maybe it's the current relationship you're in, or maybe it's just the history of the relationships that you've been, and it just seems like it's been one bad decision after one bad decision after one bad decision. And so why did David keep making bad decisions? I think the reason why David kept making bad decisions is because David was constantly asking the wrong questions. So for David, the question that was driving everything that he did was this: how much can I get away with? How far can I push that line? And when that becomes the filter to which you make all of your decisions, especially your dating and your relationship decisions, unfortunately, you're going to get burnt. And those things that you set in motion will at some point catch up to you. And there are some things, unfortunately, that happens in our relationships that can be absolutely life-changing. You see, when we believe that we are the exception to the rule, man, we can justify just about anything in our life. And we can tell ourselves that things are okay, but they're not. And this is going to be especially true in our dating lives. We have a tendency, because of our emotions, because of our feelings, to justify the things we do in our relationships. Now listen, if that's you today, I just want to tell you, listen, you're not a bad person. You're a normal person. This is, unfortunately, a side effect of sin and a side effect of brokenness in this world. So even though dating can be great, dating can also be very complicated. And so every single one of us, we are tempted to lean away from truth when it threatens somebody or something that we love. I think that's probably a lot of the way these things start. You enter a relationship with somebody, it's very healthy, and you love this person and you care for this person, and then things get a little complicated because it gets emotional. And because we don't want to lose this thing that we have, we start to bend away from the truth. Regardless of the fact today, if that's you or not you, what I'm about to say applies to absolutely everybody watching today, and that's this: you owe it to yourself to be honest with yourself. You owe it to yourself to be honest to yourself. Listen, you owe it to you and your life and your dating life to be the absolute best you can be. You owe that to yourself. Maybe the reason why you're in some of the situations you're in right now is because you've been asking the wrong questions. Maybe today would be a great day to start asking the right questions when it comes to not just your dating life, but your life in general. Let me just throw some out for you. Is there any area where you find yourself thinking that you can get away with something? That's the wrong question. Maybe this. Is there any area where you find yourself thinking, that may be true for everyone else, but I don't think that's true for me? It's probably the wrong question. Or maybe is there anything that makes you think, you know what, I have things under control even when everybody else is telling me that they're not? That's the wrong question. I think really here's what I'm saying. Is there areas of your life right now where you're just not being honest with yourself? Why? Maybe you're asking the wrong questions. And so ultimately, what happens with David? How does David finally kind of stop this destructive chain? What helps him come to his senses? Well, there's this guy named Nathan who shows up. Now, Nathan was a prophet. And if you know anything about prophets in the Old Testament, prophets communicated for God. So when God would have a message for the people, and specifically a message for the king, these prophets would bring it. And so Nathan shows up to David's house, and this is several months after this situation has happened. As a matter of fact, David and Bathsheba, this child that they had has been born. And so this is when the situation is taking place. So Nathan shows up, and he talks to David, and he's like, King David, there's a situation happening that we need your help with. And David's like, what do you got? Let me have it, because I'm a wise guy. I'm a man after God's own heart. Let me hear it. So he says, there's two men. There's one guy who is incredibly poor. He doesn't have anything, but he has this little sheep. And this isn't like a pet to this guy. This is like his child. He's had it since it was a baby. Like this child sits at his table and eats from his hand, probably sleeps at the foot of his bed. This is all that he has in his life. And this poor man has a neighbor who's incredibly wealthy, has hundreds of sheep. And so the rich man has this big party, and he has all these friends come over, and he wants to feed the friends. And so instead of grabbing one of his hundreds of sheep, this rich man goes over to the poor man's house, and he takes his one and only sheep, basically his child, and he kills it, and he feeds it to his friends. And Nathan says, King, what should we do with this man? And David is just outraged. I mean, he is set to bring punishment to this man. And he says, you bring me this man, and I will punish him, and I will bring justice. And then it's like this dramatic soap opera moment where then Nathan looks at David, and he's like, you are the man. Dun, dun, dun. And David in that moment realizes, I'm the rich man. I had everything that I could ever want. God had blessed me with such an incredible life, and I took something that wasn't mine, and I destroyed it. And in that moment, David's heart is broken from what he's done. Actually, in Psalm 51, David will go on to pray and to repent and to beg God for forgiveness and to beg God to clean his heart. And God does. God forgives David. And God allows David to stay as king. But unfortunately, there are consequences that came from that. One of the consequences was that David's baby died. And then David would have unrest for the rest of his time as king. As his children would grow up, there would be disputes and problems. And so the consequences of this moment stuck with David. You know, as we start to kind of close out this message and we start to think about our life and we think about specifically our dating relationships, what are the areas of your life that you're not being honest with yourself about? And do you have somebody in your life that you trust to be honest with you? I just wonder, how long would David have kept going, living in denial, acting like everything was okay, if Nathan wouldn't have showed up in his life? Listen, we all need a person who will be honest with us, even when we're not being honest with ourselves. So as we close out this video, let me just give you a couple things that I think could be an encouragement. Even though right now you're watching this from home and you're social distancing from all your friends, we know that just because life has stopped outside of the house, it definitely hasn't stopped inside your house. We know that your social lives are still staying active as you're on your phones, connecting with your friends and keeping relationships up. Hopefully you're making good decisions with your phone and you're making healthy decisions with your friends. But here's some things that I think can help you to be honest with yourself. First off, you need to find a Nathan. You need to find somebody that's going to be honest with you, somebody that you trust. And somebody that you know is not going to sugarcoat the things that are happening in your life. And then when you find that Nathan, you need to ask them to help you see areas of your life where you're not being honest with yourself. And you need to give them the right to be able to call you out on your stuff. And then you need to listen to them. Now listen, when you find this person, you need to find somebody that values the things that you value. Those rules that we talked about in relationships at the beginning that we don't want to bend, you need to find somebody that will uphold those rules. And I'm telling you, you really need to find somebody that loves Jesus. Find somebody that loves Jesus the way that you love Jesus, that is praying, that is reading scripture, and that when you allow them to come into your life, they're going to give you good truth. And they're going to help you be the best person that you can be in your relationship with God. Because listen, you owe it to yourself to have a clear view of who you are and to have a clear view of your life and your choices. And sometimes the only way we can do that is to surround ourselves with other people that are going to be honest with us. We say this all the time, show me your friends and I'll show you your future. We also say that you are the average of the 5 people that you're closest with. Who are those people and what kind of influence are they having in you? And are they being honest? Are you being honest? Listen, I promise you this. Being honest with yourself now will save you a lot of pain later. We got to be willing to let people in, and we got to be real. Here's what I know. All of us, we can end up in a million different places by accident, all because we never asked tough questions and we never made tough decisions. In the end, you will end up where you want to be in dating and relationships when you're honest with yourself and you let people in to be honest with you. You owe it to yourself to be honest with yourself. Let's pray. God, thank you so much for just this opportunity to gather together. God, screen to screen, being able to touch so many different people through social media. God, we thank you that even though we're going through these situations, we can still connect. And God, we thank you for your truth and your word today, knowing that, God, we have to be honest with ourselves and we need to let people in. And that, God, unfortunately, there are consequences to the decisions that we make. God, nobody is an exception. And God, we are thankful that when we do make mistakes, when we do fall, just like David, when we repent and we come to you, that we know that, God, that we can be forgiven and we can experience your grace and we can experience your mercy. And for some of us, there are decisions that we make that we can walk away from. And for others, there are decisions that we make that we will walk away from, but we will unfortunately bring some of what we did with us. God, regardless of where we end on any of that, God, we know that you are never done with us and that you work all things for good. So God, we lift up those that are listening and watching right now, that they would just feel your mercy and your grace. Some of us that are listening right now, this is a great time for us just to cry out to you, to ask for forgiveness for the way we've handled our relationships, to ask for help, to ask for a Nathan to step into our lives. For some of us who know we have a Nathan, we got to call them up today, and we got to check in with them and say, listen, I'm not doing okay. And for those of us that aren't in any of those places, maybe we're not in a relationship right now. Maybe today's message is a message that just helps plant some seeds so that we can ultimately be who we want to be. Because in the end, we just want to bring glory to your name. God, we just want to be a light for you. We want to be your hands and we want to be your feet. We know that you have a plan and a purpose for our lives, and we want to find it. We want to walk in it. God, we thank you for who you are and what you do. In your name, amen. Well, hey, I just want to say thank you so much for taking time to tune in and check out what's happening here. At 12 o'clock, we are going to be rolling into our small group experience. It's going to be happening on Zoom. Hopefully you've gotten a hold of your small group leader and they've gotten a hold of you and you've downloaded the Zoom app, and we're going to keep this going at the 12 o'clock. Just a couple final reminders before you get out of here. Don't forget to tune in tonight at 6 o'clock on Instagram as we announce the first events for the quarantine games. And remember, Monday through Saturday at 8 o'clock, we're going to be checking in with you every night, bringing you something positive, something encouraging, and praying for you. We know that God is in this situation right now, and we just want you to know we are here. Anything you need, check in with us. If we can pray for you, if we can help you out, and we can't wait till we can get together face to face soon. We love you guys. Have a great week.